Jack Thompson stood in front of his new quarters aboard the Galactic Alliance flagship, Starcutter, holding a worn toolbox in one hand and a duffel bag in the other, his eyes fixed on the door's control panel, which was flashing between green and red, clearly malfunctioning. A smile crept across his face. "Well, might as well start fixing things right away," he muttered, placing his bags down and pulling out a multi-tool from his pocket. Within seconds, he had the panel's cover off and was elbow-deep in wires. The door suddenly slid open, revealing a towering figure that made Jack freeze mid-wire splice. Standing over 7 feet tall was a Vex warrior, their species' characteristic metallic purple scales gleaming under the corridor lights. The alien's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as it looked down at Jack. "You are tampering with military property," the Vex stated, its translator giving the words a deep, resonant quality. Jack slowly pulled his hands out of the panel. "Actually, I'm fixing it." The sync circuit was reversed. "I'm Engineer Jack Thompson, and according to this," he pulled out his datapad with his free hand, "this is my new quarters." "Incorrect. These are my quarters. I am Combat Specialist Krull." They stared at each other for a moment before Jack's datapad beeped. A message scrolled across the screen. "Confirmation of shared quarters assignment. Engineer Thompson, J and Combat Specialist Krull. Please refer to the new Galactic Alliance Integration Initiative." Krull's upper eyes narrowed while the lower ones widened, a Vex expression of surprise. "This must be a mistake." "Look," Jack said, gathering his bags. "I'm not thrilled about this either, but orders are orders, right?" He stepped past Krull into the room and stopped short. The quarters were immaculate. One half was arranged with military precision, weapons and armor displayed perfectly, bed made with corners sharp enough to cut paper. Traditional Vex meditation crystals were arranged in perfect geometric patterns on a small altar. Jack looked at his side of the room, which was completely bare except for standard military furniture. He dropped his duffel bag, and a wrench fell out, clattering on the floor. Krull visibly winced at the sound. "I will speak to command about this immediately," Krull announced, turning to leave. "Already tried," Jack called after him, starting to unpack. "They said it's part of some new integration program, something about improving human-alien cooperation." Krull returned an hour later to find Jack's side of the room transformed. Tools were scattered across the desk, half-assembled devices littered the floor, and what appeared to be a modified power converter was humming in the corner. The Vex warrior stood in the doorway, all 4 eyes wide with horror. "What have you done to our quarters?" "Made myself at home," Jack replied cheerfully, not looking up from the device he was soldering. "Don't worry, this is actually pretty organized for me. You should see my old workshop on Earth." This is, Krull seemed to be struggling to find words. "This is unacceptable. There are regulations about quarters maintenance." Jack finally looked up, noticing Krull's genuine distress. "Okay, look, I know this isn't ideal for either of us, but I'm really good at what I do, even if my methods seem chaotic. Just like I'm sure you're excellent at whatever it is you do with all those impressive-looking weapons. I am a combat specialist trained in 15 forms of warfare," Krull stated proudly. "See, we both have our specialties. Maybe we can learn from each other." Krull looked skeptical, but stepped into the room. "Your devices, they are safe." "Mostly," Jack grinned, then quickly added, seeing Krull's expression. "I mean, yes, absolutely safe. Military-grade safe. Would you like me to explain how they work?" "I would prefer you explain your organization system first," Krull replied, staring at a pile of spare parts. "System," Jack laughed. "Well, that might be a bit of a stretch." As the ship's artificial day cycle dimmed to evening, both occupants of the room prepared for sleep, each wondering how they would survive this arrangement. Neither noticed the small smile on Captain Reed's face as she reviewed the quarter's monitoring report. Her integration experiment was off to an interesting start. 3 days into their shared living arrangement, Krull sat cross-legged on his meditation mat, trying to focus on his morning rituals. The key word was trotting. From somewhere in Jack's cluttered half of the room came a constant humming noise, followed by occasional sparks. "Must you do that during my meditation time?" Krell asked, keeping his 4 eyes closed. "Oh, sorry," Jack replied from behind a pile of equipment. "Just trying to boost the efficiency of our room's power supply. We're running at only 94% capacity, you know." 94% is within acceptable parameters, Krell stated. "But it's not perfect," Jack said, continuing to work. He started humming again, an old Earth tune that his grandfather had taught him. Krell's upper eyes opened first, then his lower ones. His morning peace was officially ruined. He stood up, his impressive height making the room feel even smaller. "Engineer Thompson, we must discuss boundaries." "Sure, what's on your mind?" Jack rolled out from behind his workbench, his face smudged with grease. "In the past 3 days, you have violated 17 standard room protocols, created 4 unauthorized power modifications," and Krell paused, looking particularly pained. "Left tools on my side of the room." "Oh, right. I was wondering where my plasma cutter went." Jack started rummaging through his things. "That is not the point," Krell said. "Today is my sacred cleaning ritual. It occurs once every lunar cycle, and I must cleanse my weapons and armor with traditional oils and—" A loud pop interrupted him, followed by a flash of light. The room went dark. "Oops," Jack's voice came from the darkness. "Minor setback. Don't worry, I can fix this." "What did you do?" Krell demanded. "The experimental power converter might have overloaded. But hey, look on the bright side. Now we know the maximum threshold." The emergency lights kicked in, bathing the room in a red glow. Krell stood there, holding his ceremonial cleaning oils, which had spilled all over his armor during the power surge. "This is unacceptable." Krell's voice boomed. "I am reporting this to command immediately." 20 minutes later, they both stood before Captain Reed in her office. The captain looked at them with an expression that somehow managed to be both amused and stern. "Let me get this straight," she said. "Combat Specialist Krell, you want Engineer Thompson removed from your quarters because his enthusiasm for improvement interferes with your rituals." "Yes, Captain," Krell replied stiffly. "And Engineer Thompson, you believe Combat Specialist Krell's adherence to regulations is hindering your ability to innovate." "Well, when you put it that way." Jack shuffled his feet. Captain Reed leaned back in her chair. "Request denied. Both of you. This program is too important to abandon at the first sign of conflict. You will learn to work together." As they walked back to their quarters, Jack broke the uncomfortable silence. "Look, I feel bad about the cleaning ritual. What if I help you clean your armor? I've got some amazing sonic cleaning tools that might work even better than traditional oils." Krell stopped walking. "You would help with a Vex ritual." "Sure, why not? And maybe you could teach me about these rituals. Might help me understand when not to blow up the room." Krell was quiet for a moment. "Your sonic tools, they will not damage the ceremonial markings. Trust me, I can calibrate them perfectly. Actually," Jack's eyes lit up with that familiar inventor's gleam, "I might be able to modify them to enhance the markings." "No modifications," Krell said quickly. Then, more softly, "But I would appreciate the help with the standard cleaning." That evening, to the surprise of passing crew members, the sounds of both Vex ceremonial chants and human technical explanations drifted from their quarters. Inside, Jack carefully handled each piece of armor with his sonic cleaner, while Krell explained the significance of each marking and symbol. The armor had never been cleaner, and for the first time, both roommates went to sleep feeling like maybe, just maybe, this arrangement wasn't completely hopeless. The star cutter shook violently, throwing Jack from his bunk. Red warning lights flashed as the ship's AI announced, "Warning. Engine core malfunction. All engineering personnel report to stations." "What's happening?" Krell asked, already fully alert and standing. "Nothing good," Jack replied, pulling on his boots. Those vibrations feel like a core misalignment. He grabbed his emergency toolkit and rushed out, with Krell following close behind. When they reached engineering, chaos greeted them. Blue plasma leaked from the main engine core, and warning sirens blared throughout the section. Chief Engineer Miller was shouting orders as engineers rushed around with scanning equipment. "Thompson." "Thank goodness," Miller called out. "The diplomatic delegation is waiting, and we're stuck here with a failing engine core. Standard protocols aren't working." Jack studied the readouts on the main screen. The numbers made his eyes widen. "The containment field is failing. We've got maybe 20 minutes before total core failure." "Impossible." A tall VEX engineer stepped forward. "We followed all proper VEX engineering protocols for core maintenance." "Well, your protocols aren't working now, are they?" Jack muttered, already pulling tools from his kit. "You dare question VEX engineering standards?" The VEX engineer's 4 eyes narrowed dangerously. "Enough," Chief Miller shouted. "What are our options, Thompson?" Jack was already climbing up to the core access panel. "The standard protocols won't work because this isn't a standard problem. The core crystals have developed a unique resonance pattern, but if I can modify the containment field to match that pattern." "That's against all safety regulations," the VEX engineer protested. "It could cause a cascade failure. Or it could save the ship," Jack replied, already pulling out panels. "Stop him," the VEX engineer ordered. 2 VEX technicians moved forward, but Krell stepped between them and Jack. "Let him work." Krell's voice carried the weight of authority. All 4 of his eyes fixed on his fellow VEX. "I have seen Engineer Thompson's methods. They are unorthodox but effective." "You defend this chaos?" the VEX engineer asked incredulously. "I defend results," Krell replied firmly. "And we are running out of time." Above them, Jack worked frantically, connecting bypass circuits and rerouting power. His hands moved with practiced speed, even as sweat dripped down his face from the heat of the failing core. "Core failure in 5 minutes, the ship's AI announced calmly. "Thompson," Chief Miller called out nervously. "Almost there," Jack muttered, making one final connection. "Krell, I need your strength up here." Without hesitation, Krell climbed up to join Jack. Together, they forced open a stuck maintenance panel that needed manual adjustment. "Turn it exactly 47 degrees clockwise," Jack instructed. "That is not a standard increment," Krell noted, but followed the instruction precisely. "Core failure in 2 minutes." Jack typed commands into his pad rapidly. Come on. Got it. Initiating containment field modification now." The engine core pulsed brightly, then settled into a steady blue glow. The warning sirens stopped, and the vibrations ceased. The readouts showed the core stabilizing. Core stability restored. All systems returning to normal parameters, the AI announced. A cheer went up from the human engineers. The VEX technicians looked stunned. "How did you know that would work?" the VEX engineer asked Jack. "I didn't," Jack admitted, climbing down. "But I noticed the core's resonance pattern matched an old Earth music frequency. Sometimes you have to improvise." "Improvisation is not part of VEX engineering doctrine," the VEX engineer stated. "Perhaps," Krell spoke up, "that is why the Galactic Alliance wishes our peoples to work together. Different approaches, complementary strengths." Chief Miller nodded approvingly. "Well said, Krell. And excellent work, Thompson. You just saved us from a major diplomatic incident. The delegates won't even know there was a problem." As they walked back to their quarters later, Krell looked at Jack. "Your methods are chaotic, but I cannot deny their effectiveness." "And your support back there made all the difference," Jack replied. "Maybe this roommate thing isn't so bad after all." "Perhaps not," Krell agreed, "though you still leave tools on my side of the room." Jack grinned. Some things never change. They reached their quarters, both tired but satisfied. It had been a day of chaos, but also of newfound respect. As Jack fell asleep that night, He realized that sometimes the best partnerships come from the most unlikely combinations. "Your stance is wrong," Krell said, circling Jack in the ship's training room. "Feet wider, center of gravity lower." Jack adjusted his position, holding the training staff as instructed. After the engine crisis, they had started an unofficial exchange of skills. Krell would teach combat techniques, and Jack would explain engineering principles. "Better," Krell nodded. "Now, the first form of Vex staff combat begins with." Jack spun the staff experimentally and promptly hit himself in the back of the head. "Ow. Perhaps we should start with basic grip," Krell suggested, all four eyes showing what Jack had learned was amusement. In the corner of the training room, several crew members watched with interest. The unlikely friendship between the human engineer and the Vex warrior had become something of a ship-wide sensation. "Watch carefully," Krell demonstrated a simple blocking move. "This technique has defended Vex warriors for 10,000 years." Jack mimicked the move, doing better this time. 10,000 years of the same move. Hasn't anyone tried to improve it? "Improve perfection?" Krell asked. "Nothing's perfect," Jack replied, attempting the block again. "Take our quarters lighting system. Standard issue, works fine, but I improved its efficiency by 15% last week. By creating a small fire," Krell reminded him. "That was just part of the testing process." Later that evening, they sat in their quarters. Jack had set up a makeshift card table, teaching Krell the human game of poker. The Vex warrior studied his cards with intense concentration. "I still do not understand why a flush is superior to a straight," Krell said. "It's just the rules," Jack explained, dealing another hand. "Like how you have rules about which meditation crystals go where. Those arrangements have deep spiritual significance." "And poker has deep," Jack paused, grinning, "gambling significance." A knock at their door interrupted them. Lieutenant Reed, their next-door neighbor, stood there looking apologetic. "Hey Jack, my replicator's acting up again. Any chance you could?" "Say no more." Jack grabbed his toolkit. "Want to learn about replicator maintenance?" he asked Krell. The Vex warrior nodded, following them. As Jack opened the replicator's panel, he began explaining the components. "See this power coupling? It's like your staff techniques, all about proper alignment and balance." Krell leaned in, genuinely interested. "The energy flow patterns do resemble certain combat forms." "Exactly. And this circuit board is like battle strategy. Everything has to work together or," the replicator sparked, making them jump back, "or that happens." "You appear to be creating teaching moments from random chaos," Krell observed. "That's the human way," Jack laughed, fixing the spark. "We find lessons everywhere, even in failure." "A strange concept," Krell mused. "Vex training focuses on perfection through repetition." "But you've been trying new things lately," Lieutenant Reed pointed out. "I saw you using human exercise equipment yesterday." "Indeed. I have found that some human methods have merit." Krell helped Jack replace the replicator panel, though I still maintain that tool organization is not optional. Back in their quarters, they resumed their poker game. Other crew members had joined them, making it a regular evening event. "Full house," Jack announced, laying down his cards. "Impossible," Krell said, studying the cards. "I was certain your physical indicators suggested a bluff." "Learn to control them," Jack grinned. "Like how you taught me to control my breathing in combat training." As the evening wound down and their guests left, Krell began his evening meditation. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Jack sat down quietly with his engineering manual, respecting the silence. "You are learning," Krell commented after finishing. "So are you," Jack replied, pointing to Krell's desk where, for the first time, a few tools lay slightly out of perfect alignment. "Your organization is becoming almost human." "Do not push your luck," Krell warned, but his tone was light. The ship's night cycle began, dimming the lights automatically, now with 15% more efficiency. In the semi-darkness, both Human and Vex reflected on how much they'd learned from each other and how much more there was still to discover. "Tomorrow, I teach you Vex battlefield calculations," Krell said as they prepared for sleep. "Only if you let me explain quantum fluctuation patterns," Jack countered. "Agreed, though I suspect they will somehow end in explosion." "Only small ones," Jack promised with a grin. The first explosion rocked the Starcutter during the night cycle. Jack fell out of his bunk for the second time that month, but this time it wasn't due to engine trouble. "We're under attack," Krell announced, already grabbing his combat gear. Those were boarding charges. The ship's eye blared. "Warning. Hull breach detected. Multiple unauthorized entries. All personnel to battle stations." "They breached near our section," Jack said, checking the room's security display. One of his many unauthorized modifications. Engineering deck is going to be their target. Krell tossed Jack a defensive vest. "Put this on. Your human fragility concerns me." "Thanks, I think." Jack quickly dressed while grabbing his emergency toolkit. "Good thing I installed those extra security measures last week. The ones that Command did not approve." "Exactly those." They heard weapons fire in the corridor outside. Krell readied his combat staff, while Jack pulled up the security controls on his tablet. "Ready?" Jack asked. "Always ready," Krell replied, "though I question your readiness given your poor staff technique." "Hey, I've improved. Besides, I've got other tricks." Jack tapped his tablet. Suddenly, the corridor lights outside began flashing in a disorienting pattern. Through their door's viewport, they saw several masked figures stumble, clearly confused by the unexpected lighting change. "Your chaos has uses," Krell admitted. "Now we fight." They burst out of their quarters, Krell taking point with his staff, while Jack covered their rear. The attackers, a mix of different alien species, were still trying to orient themselves. "Section B override, Pattern 3, Jack shouted. Krell immediately dropped into a defensive crouch, having learned to trust Jack's random-seeming commands. The corridor's artificial gravity flickered, sending the unprepared attackers floating for a crucial moment. "This is against 17 different safety protocols," Krell noted while efficiently disabling 2 floating attackers with his staff. "Technically 18, Jack replied, using his modified engineering tool as an improvised weapon to short out another attacker's equipment. But who's counting? They fought their way toward engineering, their different styles creating an unexpectedly effective combination. Krell's disciplined combat moves blended with Jack's creative use of ship systems to keep the attackers off balance. "They're trying to reach the core," Jack said, checking his tablet between skirmishes. "Same spot where we had trouble last week." They must have known about the core weakness, Krell realized. The earlier malfunction was sabotage. They reached a sealed intersection. Jack's tablet showed 5 hostiles on the other side, cutting through the door. "Ideas?" Krell asked. Jack grinned. "Remember those modifications I made to the fire suppression system? The ones I reported to Command?" "And they ignored?" "Yes, those ones." Jack started typing rapidly on his tablet. "Get ready. This might be a bit messy." The moment the attackers breached the door, Jack activated his modified system. Instead of fire suppressant, they were hit with a sticky, fast-hardening foam that he'd been experimenting with in his spare time. "What is this substance?" Krell asked, watching the attackers struggle helplessly in the rapidly solidifying foam. "Just a little something I've been working on. Mixture of standard fire suppressant and some polymer compounds I borrowed from the science lab." "Borrowed. Let's focus on the victory, not the details." They secured engineering, finding several crew members who had barricaded themselves inside. The ship's security teams arrived shortly after, mopping up the remaining attackers. Later, during the debriefing, Captain Reed reviewed their actions. "Let me get this straight," she said. "You used unauthorized lighting modifications, gravity control overrides, and experimental foam to defend the ship." "Yes, Captain," they replied in unison. And combat specialist Krell, you supported these unconventional tactics. They were effective, Captain, Krell stated. I have learned that human chaos, properly directed, can be a powerful weapon. And I've learned that Vex combat forms work really well with gravity fluctuations, Jack added. Captain Reed tried to hide her smile. Well, I can't argue with the results. Good work, both of you. Though we need to discuss these unauthorized modifications. Walking back to their quarters, Jack turned to Krell. You know, we make a pretty good team. Indeed, Krell agreed. Though your foam has ruined my favorite staff. I can fix that. I've been working on a solvent that might help. It's still experimental, but... No experiments on my weapons, Krell said firmly. Fair enough, Jack laughed. Hand cleaning it is. This is a terrible idea, Krell said, watching crews from different ships arrive for the annual Galactic Alliance competition. It's a brilliant idea, Jack replied, tinkering with what looked like a modified combat suit. We're going to show everyone how human-Vex cooperation works. The ship's main hangar was filled with teams from across the fleet. The competition, designed to test both combat and technical skills, was a prestigious event. No mixed species team had ever entered before. The other Vex warriors are staring, Krell noted. Let them stare. They're just jealous of our superior room organization skills. You left a screwdriver in my meditation bowl this morning. Almost superior room organization skills, Jack corrected with a grin. Captain Reed approached their preparation area. Are you too sure about this? The course is designed to be challenging even for traditional teams. We're sure, Captain, Jack said, making final adjustments to his equipment. Right, Krell. The Vex warrior nodded. Though I question the safety of your modifications. They're perfectly safe. Mostly safe. Safe-ish. The competition began with the combat phase. Teams had to navigate an obstacle course while defending against automated defense systems. Most teams followed standard military tactics. Jack and Krell had other ideas. Now, Krell shouted as they reached the first barrier. Jack activated his modified gravity boots, running up the wall while Krell provided covering fire. The spectators gasped. No one had ever tried vertical navigation of the course before. Show-offs, muttered a Vex commander in the crowd. Time for that thing we practiced. Jack called down to Krell. The maneuver you named Crazy Human Death Throw. Yes. Krell used his staff to launch Jack over a defensive position. While airborne, Jack dropped several small devices, his technical surprises as he called them. They created a field of electromagnetic interference, confusing the automated defenses. That's not regulation equipment, one of the judges protested. Actually, Captain Reed intervened. The rules only specify no weapons. Those are modified engineering tools. The technical challenge came next. Teams had to repair a damaged reactor while defending against security protocols. Standard Vex approach, Krell suggested. With a human twist, Jack agreed. While other teams tried to either fight through or hack the security systems, Krell performed a traditional Vex combat dance. The precise movements kept the security sensors focused on him, while Jack used the distraction to literally crawl through the maintenance tubes. This is undignified, Krell commented, still dancing. But effective. Jack's voice echoed from inside the reactor housing. Also, there's something living in these tubes. I think it likes me. Please focus on the reactor. They finished the challenge in record time, though Jack emerged covered in grease and with what appeared to be a small mechanical creature perched on his shoulder. Don't ask, he told Krell. I named it Bob. The final event combined both combat and technical skills. Teams had to capture a fortified position while keeping their equipment functional under enemy fire. Ready for the big finish? Jack asked. Your plan is insane, Krell replied. So, yes. Yes. What followed became legend in Galactic Alliance history. Krell used traditional Vex battle forms, but with Jack's modified equipment adding unexpected elements. They seemed to dance through the challenge. Jack's chaos perfectly balanced by Krell's precision. The winning moment came when Jack's latest invention, a field generator he built using spare parts and borrowed power cells, combined with Krell's combat expertise to create a perfect storm of technical and tactical brilliance. They stood victorious, though slightly singed, as the judges announced the results. First place, though we're still debating some of their methods, the head judge said, looking particularly at Bob the Tube Creature, who was now wearing a tiny engineer's badge Jack had made. During the award ceremony, Captain Reed couldn't hide her pride. You've done more than win a competition. You've shown what's possible when different cultures work together. Speaking of working together, Jack said, wait until you see my plans for our quarter's new security system. No, Krell said firmly. But it only has a small chance of explosion. No. Tiny chance. No. That evening, celebrating in their quarters with other crew members, Krell turned to Jack. Your chaos brought us victory. Your discipline made it possible, Jack replied. We should compete again next year. Perhaps, if you promise not to adopt any more tube creatures. No promises. Bob needs a friend. The room filled with laughter, human and alien alike, as they celebrated not just their victory, but the unusual friendship that made it possible. 6 months after their competition victory, Jack and Krell stood before a new batch of mixed human Vex crews. Their quarters, now officially designated as Cultural Integration Training Room 1, had become a mandatory stop for all new mixed species assignments. Welcome to Room Sharing 101, Jack announced cheerfully. Today you'll learn how a human and a Vex can share space without killing each other. Most of the time, Krell added, all 4 eyes showing amusement. The room itself had become famous throughout the fleet. One half remained perfectly organized in traditional Vex style, while the other half looked like an engineer's workshop had exploded, albeit with slightly more organization than when Jack first arrived. As you can see, Jack gestured around. We've achieved a perfect balance. There is still a screwdriver in my meditation bowl, Krell pointed out. A nearly perfect balance, Jack corrected. The new crews looked around in amazement. A Vex warrior raised his hand. Is it true you modified the room's systems 73 times? 74 now, Jack grinned. Wait until you see what I did with the air filtration. No demonstrations, Krell interrupted quickly. The last one turned the corridor purple for 3 days. A human engineer stepped forward. And you actually learned Vex combat forms? She asked Jack. Well, sort of. Jack picked up a training staff. Want to show them, Krell? Are you sure? Remember last time? That ceiling panel needed replacing anyway. They demonstrated their unique training style, with Jack mixing traditional Vex moves with his own improvised techniques, while Krell showed how he'd adapted to counter Jack's unpredictable style. The key, Krell explained afterward, is finding balance between order and chaos. Like how Krell now accepts that some chaos is good, Jack added. He even lets Bob the Tube Creature visit on weekends. The small mechanical creature, now sporting several engineering badges and a tiny Vex honor mark, chirped from its corner perch. Captain Reed entered the room, smiling at the scene. Your success has inspired changes throughout the fleet. Mixed quarters are becoming standard on all ships. Though perhaps with fewer explosions, Krell noted. Minor explosions, Jack corrected. And they're getting smaller. The captain continued. The Galactic Alliance is using your example in their integration protocols. They're calling it the Thompson-Krell method. Does this mean my modifications are officially approved? Jack asked hopefully. No, everyone in the room said simultaneously. Later that evening, after the new crews had left, Jack and Krell sat in their quarters. Jack was tinkering with a new device while Krell polished his staff. Remember when you first moved in? Jack asked. You were horrified by my chaotic human ways. I still am, Krell replied. But I have learned that some chaos has value. Like how you learned that some order is necessary. Hey, I'm very ordered now. I label all my experimental devices. Probably won't explode is not a proper warning label. They were interrupted by a knock. A nervous-looking human Vex pair stood at their door. "We're having trouble with our room arrangements," the human explained. "Could you help?" Jack and Krell exchanged looks. "Show us," they said together. As they walked to help the new roommates, Jack turned to Krell. "You know, when they first assigned us to share quarters, I thought it was the worst idea ever." "As did I," Krell agreed. "I was certain one of us would not survive the first week. And now look at us, teaching others, winning competitions, only occasional explosions. We have become what the humans call best friends," Krell said. "Was that hard to say?" "Extremely." They reached the troubled roommates' quarters. Inside, they found the typical early signs of cultural clash: rigid organization meeting creative chaos. "Right," Jack said, pulling out his toolkit. "First lesson. Sometimes the best solution isn't in any manual." "Second lesson," Krell added. "Sometimes chaos and order create something better together." As they helped the new pair find their balance, Jack smiled at their own quarters request form sitting in his pocket. They had officially asked to remain permanent roommates, the first human Vex pair to do so. The ship hummed around them, its engines running at 98% efficiency, thanks to Jack's latest improvements, while Bob the tube creature watched from a perfectly aligned perch, thanks to Krell's insistence on proper mounting protocols. It wasn't a combination anyone had expected to work, but sometimes the best things in life come from the most unlikely partnerships.